Togo is ruled by what I will call, in simple word, a thug regime. In Togo, we are not citizens, we are hostages. The CFA initial name, franc CFA, was franc des colonies françaises d'Afrique, the franc of the French colonies in Africa. It was created in 1946. The CFA was created, all our gold reserves were put in the Bank of France, and we were required, in addition to that, to have the French officials decide of our monetary policies and budgetary policies. A country economy is defined by the monetary policy, the fiscal policy, the budgetary policy. In our case, 2/3 is entirely decided by France. I grew up hearing about devaluation. Like, it was like on everybody's lips. It felt like it was the most tragic economic event in our history. Our parents woke up one morning and they were told all of their savings was worth half. So you have 1,000 euros in savings, you wake up tomorrow and they tell you now it's worth 500 euros. That is entirely theft.
Welcome to the Microscopic Podcast presented by Gold Republic. My name is Alexei Joranov, and in this format I invite you to look at the world through different lenses, to see what's hidden in plain sight. We'll dive deep to understand the forces that drive macroeconomics, financial markets, and the emergence of a new monetary system with some money like gold, silver, and digital assets like Bitcoin. We'll also investigate how geopolitics and power games shape the world we live in, but also what can we learn from history to understand the present and prepare for the future. I hope you will get fresh insight and enjoy this conversation. If you do, as always, please give it a like and subscribe, but also leave your actions down below in the comment section and share it to those who need to hear this. But before I start, I'd like you to know that if you open an account at Gold Republic, you will receive 1 free gram of gold. Just click on the link in the description. So welcome to the podcast, Farida Nabourema.
Thank you for having me.
Ça va, la forme?
Ça va très bien, merci.
So we met actually a funny story years ago, and you didn't remember because you've seen like many other faces.
Right.
You also feel from in New York.
Right.
And already back then, I was really inspired about, well, first of all the activists that are there are basically fighting for the freedom of their own people in countries around the world where freedom is not as the one that we enjoy in countries like Portugal, like where we are right now. And I thought it was really inspiring. And now I meet you again at the Bitcoin conference.
Right.
So I find it fascinating because I wasn't expecting to meet you here. And,
I can imagine.
Yeah. And I think first and foremost, what would be nice also for listeners and viewers that don't know you, to also get to know you a bit better, and also maybe share your story about first of all what brought you to being a freedom activist.
Okay.
And then maybe on like what's Bitcoin, its role is in your life.
Sure, I'll be more than happy to. Yeah.
So how did you how did your whole story start? You're from Togo. Maybe to give you a bit of context about like the situation of the country today, and maybe a bit historically like how it's evolved.
First of all, thank you for having me. I think I have told my story so many times that sometimes I'm a little, I wouldn't say embarrassed, but a little bothered when I have to repeat it again. Not for the right reason, of course, not because I'm tired of saying what's fighting for my country or talking about the abuse people face there, but just that sometimes it's hurtful to realize that after so many years, things haven't really changed, and the situation has been in so many extents the same. So I come from Togo. It is a West African nation of about 9 million people today. It has been governed by the oldest autocratic regime in Africa. The same family has ruled the country for the past 58 years. Father and son took over. The father ruled for 38 years. The son has ruled for 29 years, going to 20. and all more than 2 generations of Togolese people have known their entire life has been dictatorship at the hands of this regime that is using absolutely all the means it can to keep themselves in power and continue abusing the people and looting the resources of the nation. So I became an activist pretty young when I was still a teenager. I wouldn't say I was fortunate because it is not a happy event, but I will say that I had the opportunity to witness civil resistance from my father, who himself was an activist, and who before him also learned from his father, my grandfather, who also was an activist. My grandfather went to prison for the first time in the 50s as an independence, as a member of the independence movement for Togo when he was fighting against French colonialism. And eventually when Togo became independent in 1960, 3 years later, our president was assassinated by members of the former members of the French colonial army who were sent by the French administration.
The president was elected democratically.
Absolutely. He was our first democratically elected president, and he was assassinated, and I will tell you later why, because it has to do with Bitcoin, where I'm into Bitcoin today. It's completely linked together. And our president's assassination led to that regime taking over, that dictator taking over, Eyadema Simbe, a few years later in 1967, and he ruled with the full support of President de Gaulle, then President Pompidou, then François Mitterrand, all the presidents that led France from 1967 to when he died in 2005, fully supported him. And in fact, the day he died on the French international radio called RFI, the president of France then, Jacques Chirac, said something and I will never forget. He said, Eyadema was a personal friend and a great ally of France. They have lost a big man, a great man. It was so hurtful to hear that. I was 15 years old when I heard that on radio, because this is the same Eyadema that we in Togo were so terrified of. This is Eyadema that was very, very popular for some of the most gruesome human rights violations that you can think of. Activists, politicians, dissident journalists being killed, their bodies dumped in the sea and the laguna, and they will be fetched out, people being massacred at protests, people being jailed for years and tortured in the most unbelievable ways. We live the horror story. So hearing the president of France say on radio that he lost a personal friend and a great ally of France, for me it was the most painful thing to hear, but also at that age, it made me realize, even though I was young, that regime benefited a lot from the support of the French government, and they never hid it, and that our struggle was not just against the regime, but it was against the colonial establishment that put him there for specific interests that he was helping them achieve. I continued my activism and eventually left Togo when I was in university to continue my education in America. But then while in university, I discovered the internet, the power of the internet, and I started using blogging, writing to communicate to people and to mobilize around the issue. And I founded a movement called the Four Must Go movement. Eventually, some years later, I went back to Togo because I felt like I needed to be really in touch with the realities of people on the ground. Also because one of the biggest criticism the regime and their supporters will say is that, oh, you guys are outside of Togo, you have no idea what's happening. Togo has changed ever since you left. The son is doing better than the father. You cannot say you want the son to go when you haven't really seen the work he's doing. Then I went to Togo, and I remember visiting my high school. And my high school was the largest high school in Togo. It was built in 1952. It's a very old high school called Lycée de Togo. and it used to have a dormitory, and teachers used to have their apartments on buildings inside the compound of the school. So a lot of teachers were lodged on the school premises, including the principal. It was a huge campus. So I go back there and I see the school in the most horrendous condition. My teachers' apartments were covered with mold. Like, you see the green mold everywhere. And, I became severely asthmatic when I started high school, to a point where I was always in the ER, and I almost died on 2 occasions. It was really bad. I'll have asthma attacks all the time. It wasn't until I left the country that I realized that mold also had something to do with it. But at the time, it wasn't that bad. Realizing that going back to the same school 10 years later, the condition is far worse than before. And I met some of my professors. I saw the poverty level in which they were living. And these are some of the most brilliant people with degrees. One of my math teachers got his degree in nuclear science in Russia, living in extreme poverty. Then I was like, what the hell were they saying when they said this son was ruling better? So I went as far as visiting health centers, community centers, schools, and I saw the most unthinkable: women delivering their babies on the floor because there was no bed in the public hospitals, doctors prescribing sachet water to wash their hands for surgery because there's no running hot water in the public hospitals in Togo. And I went mad. I was angry because you can see the contrast between the level of poverty and the extreme luxury, lavish lifestyle of the ruling elite. So I was not just troubled or sad, I was angry. I took the internet and I was ranting, and I remember doing a video in which I said that I don't care what it costs me and I don't care how much it takes. I will not rest until I remove that regime from power. And I don't care even if the entirety of the people of Togo wanted them to stay. I cannot allow them to stay because they have taken too much from the children of this nation, and we owe it to the next generation that they don't get to live in this kind of indignity. And things went from there. I became even more involved in my activism. I focused my entire time on this struggle. I felt like we needed allies, so I was flying from country to country, meeting civil society organizations, activists, institutions, soliciting their support and their help, trying to raise awareness, because of course I was young and I didn't know how to do a revolution apart from reading books from Gene Sharps and other thinkers out there, but it's not enough. So I approached people who did it before us to learn from them. And on one aspect, I will say we were successful at one thing. That's we managed to reveal to the world that Togo is ruled by what I will call, in simple word, a thug regime. In Togo, we are not citizens. We are hostages. You have people who take everything from you. You work tirelessly without being able to afford food. Taxes are unbelievable. You give everything to the governments. They take all for you, but they don't provide the basic minimum. And when you dare complain, you go to prison or you're killed. They have to silence you by all means. So we are not citizens, we are hostages. And we are just paying daily ransom to survive. And it literally is a mafia that was ruling the country, and that is still ruling the country. So I tried to raise awareness on that. And I cannot take credit for doing it alone. I did not do it alone. It was a collective struggle of Togolese people from both the country and the diaspora, and it continues to be. But I was fortunate in my position to get international exposure. But for me, that exposure became a mission. That I have an easier access to international media than the average Togolese citizen made me feel like I have the exclusive responsibility to make the world know what is happening in my country. So that's how my activism came to become noticed here and there. And we are still in the journey. There are ups and downs, and I cannot guarantee if you're going to get change in 1 or 2 years. But one thing I can guarantee is that the young people of Togo are far more aware of their conditions of being exploited today than they used to be. And it's just going to be a matter of time until we manage to bring an end to that dictatorship.
Well, it's heavy. I gotta say, like, I know your story, but the way you just said it now, like, it just reminds me how brutal the reality is. And there's many aspects to that brutality. And you've mentioned the one that is political and physical and of the regime, but also what you mentioned about Jacques Chirac, who basically not only did not condemn him, but praised him. And there's a bit of a hypocrisy, I think, in the world right now. On one side, we condemn certain countries for doing certain actions, and I don't want to name things and stuff because I think every conflict has its own cross to carry. But on the other hand, there's a double standard for all those things, and I feel like this double standard, especially now with the colonial history that Togo has with many other countries in Africa, is one of the things where you can still see the remains also within the monetary system. And this is also one of the things that you talked on stage with Lenalden, Alex Gladstein, and Jack Dorsey. And it is this invisible shekels as well, right? And it's like the CFA. The CFA is a weapon of mass destruction for people's savings, and also a digital prison in the way like that system is actually implemented. So perhaps it would be good as well to define what that monetary prison is like, and how it's also on that front is necessary for you to find other possibilities to continue your fight.
Thank you. So the CFA initial name, franc CFA, was Franc des colonies françaises d'Afrique. Literally.
And still exists today.
Yes, the franc of the French colonies in Africa. It was created in 1946 for one very specific reason. So during World War II, a lot of nations lost a vast majority of their money and their gold reserves by trying to acquire weapons to fight in the war. Of course, that led the United States to become the richest nation on the planet with the largest gold reserve on the planet. At the end of the world, it was clear for some nations that were considered to be on the right, literally capitalistic nations, wanted to build a global monetary system that would allow them, on one aspect, to rebuild European nations that have lost in the world, that had lost a lot of resources in the world, but to ensure that they continue to exercise a financial control over the global population. That led to the creation of Bretton Woods institutions in 1946. That same 1946, France was broke. That was the term. France was broke, France was destroyed, France was worthless. So France needed money. France needed gold to continue being relevant and continue being considered as a world power. The resources that France has as compared to other European nations wouldn't allow it to portray itself as a key economic power with the amount of wealth that they have lost with the world. So France built the CFA system, the same 1946, that Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, and the IMF would be funded. Initially for one specific purpose, they needed our gold to be relevant. So they collected the gold reserve of all those 15 nations and kept it in the Bank of France, and automatically it increased the value of the French franc at the time.
But it basically like forced through its because back then I don't know.
You were colonies.
Yeah, so you were still colonies.
Yes.
Officially.
Yes. So we were still colonies when it happened. But on one aspect too, France knew that many of its colonies were on their way to independence, and and it needed a way to continue exercising financial control even when that independence happened. So the CFA was created, all our gold reserves were put in the Bank of France, and we were required, in addition to that, to have the French officials decide of our monetary and policies and budgetary policies. So literally a country economy is defined by the monetary policy, the fiscal policy, the budgetary policy. In our case, 2/3 is entirely decided by France.
Overseas, on another continent.
Entirely. Now, the CFA came with a lot of restrictions as well. The money cannot be converted to any other currency in the world. Yes, but the French franc at the time. So you can only use it to buy French franc. Other than that, it is worthless. So the French government keeps another 15% of our reserve for what they call to guarantee the convertibility of the currency. And they pegged the CFA franc at the time to 100 French franc. So one French franc was worth 100 CFA franc. And this was not based
In which year was that?
This was 1946.
Okay.
This was not based on our financial capacities. It was single-handedly decided by French that our money will be worth 100 of their money. And when our population and our economies and the contribution that we had was bigger than the entire French economy. But it didn't matter. So eventually, they also put a law stating that citizens from our countries could not be authorized to hold foreign currencies up to a certain amount. And that law is still existent till today. Legally, if you own the equivalent of more than $3,000 in a country like Togo, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, legally, without an authorization from the Minister of Trade and Commerce in your country, you are committing a crime.
Wow, this is wild.
Yes, the law is not enforced, but it is there and it can be used at any time. So, the first president of Togo was arrested for the first time and went to prison because he had money in British pounds in 1952.
Is that the same president that got
Who was
assassinated?
killed, yes. So Sylvanus Olympio was this brilliant man who spoke 6 languages fluently. He was fluent in French, German, Dutch, Portuguese, English.
Wow.
You know, in addition to 2 local languages in Togo. He is a graduate from the London School of Economics. He has a doctorate from American University in Washington. He was one of the brightest intellectuals of Africa at the time, and he was the director of Africa of Unilever, the British company for the continent at the time. So he eventually decided to focus his entire time on fighting for independence in Togo. So he resigned from his position as the Africa director of Unilever and moved back to Togo to lead the independence movement. So he needed to build a house, and he wrote a check to his architect in British pounds because he had a bank account in the former Gold Coast. Let me remind you that in today's Ghana, let me remind you that Togo was a German colony. After World War I, when Germany lost the war, the Brits and the French decided to split it. So the eastern side became the Togo we know today, and the western side was called British Togoland, and it chose to form the today's Ghana with the Gold Coast. So almost 1/3 of Togolese citizens at the time were living under British administration, and 2/3 under French administration. And Olympio had accounts under the British administration because he was working for a British company. That check he wrote to his architect. The architect was arrested at the border when going to the Gold Coast to cash the check. And Olympio was arrested for having in his possession British pounds without the authorization of the French government. He was banned from attending the following legislative elections that he was supposed to run for, and banned from voting. All his civil rights was revoked. He was put under detention for 2 years. So for Olympio, the priority for him when Togo becomes independent is to leave the CFA. It was both political, but also personal.
So that was actually, sorry if I interject, I guess that was the reason why he got assassinated. If Togo was leading its way out of the CFA, other countries would
Absolutely
follow.
So when he became president, he introduced a bill at the parliament asking them to to approve the creation as establishment of the Togolese franc. I have a copy of that bill and I can share it with you. It was approved on December 12, 1962. Exactly 30 days later, the night of January 12, 1963 to January 13, 1963, soldiers of the French colonial administration went to his house and assassinated him. Yeah.
Just like that.
Just like that.
It's not even covered up. It's not even like a hitman or like anyone hired like to do so.
No. And they made it look like it came from a frustration of those soldiers who were not integrated into Togolese army, but it was not true. Olympio was assassinated.
But so they came to his house and just shot him dead.
So there's another interesting part of this story. Olympio's house shared a wall with the American embassy at the time.
One wall.
They were neighbors.
Wow.
With the U.S. embassy. They were neighbors. The buildings were neighbors. His house. He was such a humble man that he didn't have a presidency. That was just his personal home he built for himself. So when the assassins came to his house, he jumped the wall and entered the premise of the U.S. embassy and asked his wife to call the ambassador of the United States and inform him that he's hiding in the compound. He needs people to come and rescue him because people are in his house and trying to kill him. The wife did just that. The U.S. ambassador was living at his residency in a different place. So the U.S. ambassador panicked because the U.S. didn't have any troop in Togo, but France still had some troops in Togo. So he now called his colleague, the ambassador of France, and told him there are people who are trying to kill the president. He's currently hiding in the compound of the U.S. embassy. But we don't have any staff there to support him. Can you send people to rescue him? And the French informed the assassins that he was inside. So they went inside the compound and they killed him inside the compound of the U.S. government.
On U.S. soil?
Yes. That's where
so
Olympio...
the U.S. was complicit also in that killing.
To some extent.
But absurd.
There's no clarity, but to some extent, Olympio was the first African president to be killed in our history, and he was the first military coup in Africa. January 13, 1963. The next morning, after killing him, they dragged his body all the way to the outside of the compound, and they left him there. His wife witnessed everything by the window, live. She witnessed everything. So that's how Olympio was assassinated.
That's gruesome. So back then, the international community, whatever you want to call it, there was no repercussions. There was, I mean, it's highly controversial. It's also on U.S. soil, theoretically.
Right.
France, I mean, there was no...
Yeah. It was a small nation.
Nobody cared, basically.
And not only that they didn't care, the reality is that the United States kept quiet for so long and endorsed a lot of the atrocities and the abuses and the illegal things and absurd things the French government was doing in its colonies, because it was a politics of scratch my back, I scratch yours, because America was doing similar things in Latin America.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
So they didn't mind their business and the French wouldn't mind theirs.
So to come back to the CFA, now it's called Communauté de France-Afrique. Or they changed?
Front des colonies françaises d'Afrique. Now it's called Communauté something.
Yes, obviously.
Honestly, to be honest with you, I don't know the actual definition because I don't care. For me, it's still going to remain Front des colonies françaises d'Afrique. So whatever they want to call it, it doesn't make a difference.
It doesn't make a difference, exactly. Because I know it as Communauté, and actually you reminded me now.
It was colonie initially.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's actually how it should be called because it's exactly what it is.
Right.
It's monetary colonialism. And that monetary colonialism is also like the reason why in those countries they are entrapped and they can basically like have their savings be devalued from one day to another to half of worth. Did you experience that yourself?
It happened twice in our history. The first time was 1964. Our country suffered 100% devaluation. The second time was 1994. I was a kid, but I grew up hearing about devaluation. Like, it was like on everybody's lips. It felt like it was the most tragic economic event in our history because our parents talk about it a lot. Like everybody would say things, before devaluation, we had a better life. Before devaluation, we could afford this. Before devaluation, things were like this. So devaluation for us resonates as the way the Great Depression will resonate for generation X and the boomers generation in the United States. Our parents woke up one morning and they were told all of their savings was worth less, half. So you have $1,000 in savings or 1,000 euros in savings. You wake up tomorrow and they tell you now it's worth 500 euros.
And that's all the blood, the sweat, all the hard work.
For decades.
Yeah.
No explanation whatsoever. No accountability. Like they didn't even bother informing us ahead. You just wake up in the morning and that was the news.
I think nobody can really imagine that.
Interestingly, for a country like Togo, our what we call gris salarial, our pay, what's the name?
In French?
Salary grid in English. Gris salarial in French, not the paycheck. The salary grid, like literally the grid I used
like
to...
the levels.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Was voted in 1961 and didn't change until recently, I think 2015 or 16. So the salary you were making in 1961 was the one that the government was following to pay you in 1994, even after the currency lost half of its value.
And plus inflation in between, I guess.
And in addition to the inflation. So on one aspect, you lose 50% with depreciation. You lose more than 30% over 30 years of inflation. So in the end, people were being paid in value less than 30% or 40% of what their parents were making 30, 40 years ago. That is entirely theft. It is not just a matter of salary, of financial inflation or currency depreciation. It is a deflation of our labor.
Yeah.
It is somebody telling you today that we are going to pay you 100 euros for your work, the same amount that is paid to people doing the same work 40 years ago, but then that 100 euro is now worth 50 euros and you have to accept it.
Yeah.
That is the kind of exploitation our citizens were subjected to. And it didn't stop there. It would even be, I wouldn't say acceptable, but it could even be endured if at least certain things were not added to this, because it all came as part of certain changes that were imposed on our nations because our government couldn't refund what they call debt. And those debts were given to dictators that embezzled it and were building castles and buying royalty castles in Europe and investing in tax havens. But the citizens have to pay the price for that. So in addition to the depreciation, we went through structural adjustments with the IMF. And what that meant is that our taxes were increased. Social services were almost entirely removed. Government public services companies were sold. So the water is no longer a company belonging to the state. The electricity company no longer belongs to the state. The telecom company no longer belongs to the state. The steel company no longer belongs to the state. The phosphate company no longer belongs to the state. They sell, privatize state agencies. Then they reduce the budget of social services. These are countries where social services are already the basic minimum because the countries are poor. But then even that basic minimum, they suppress it. We went to have a budget allocation of 11% for health to 3%. So when we have women delivering babies on the floor in the hospital, it's not just a matter of our government being callous and wicked and stealing from us. In addition to that, our budget has been constrained by international institutions because reimbursing the debt matters more than saving and protecting the lives of our women and our babies. So the state hospitals no longer had resources to function. Schools no longer have resources to function. I went to public school in Togo. Our parents were obliged to pay what they call cotisation parentale. It was out of that cotisation parentale, in addition to the tuition, that the public school principal could hire some teachers to help them. There were public schools that had like 500 students with only one science teacher.
Wow.
So 1 week he will teach in grade 6, the following week he will teach in grade 4. So maybe the whole academic year you receive your English teacher 4 or 5 times. And in one classroom you have 130 students. My mom was a teacher in public schools. I used to help her grade her papers. One classroom, on average, 120 students, and she has like 5 classrooms. That was the reality. Why? Because the state no longer had money to hire. So basic amenities and services were completely removed. So these are citizens that, first of all, your labor is devaluated, your social services are suppressed, but your taxes are increased. And when you complain, you get killed. That's why I said we are not citizens, we are hostages. Mm-hmm. And it has continued because today, the young people in Togo are far worse than our parents were in the 90s. Yeah. So when our parents already thought it was hard, for us today it's even harder. The conditions have only worsened. And we keep asking ourselves, when will it end? So it is a complete system of exploitation where the financial institutions steal from you, the colonial power takes its cut, the regime takes its cut, and you, the people, are left with nothing. No matter how hard you work, you are guaranteed one thing, is to remain poor. So for us, building wealth no longer has anything to do with effort or sacrifice or education. Building wealth in our culture has become a matter of being close to power. It is your proximity to the people at the helm of power that gives you access to wealth. So those in power do everything possible to remain in power.
It's self-reinforcing.
Because that's the only way they can continue making money. And those who don't have power are left out and will remain poor and exploited for the rest of their lives.
So what is a solution? And so obviously like Bitcoin, I guess, has its a role in that, because it can basically give you like a 24/7 access, global access to a store value that is unconfiscatable. How did you first actually encounter like Bitcoin, and were able to also see how it could actually help people in your own country?
I started using Bitcoin in 2018. The first time I bought Bitcoin was way before that, but it was something I did like any curious person. Honestly, I even lost the wallet in which I put it. But it was in 2018 that I started using it more seriously, because I was looking for solutions to be able to send money anonymously, because I wanted to protect myself and protect the people that the money was being sent to. Then it was just, at the time, it was just a tool. It was just like a private or anonymous PayPal or Cash App or whatever. But then eventually I got curious about wanting to understand how it works, and I started reading about it. And when I started reading about it, I went to the very basic to understand everything. Then it became like a wake-up call, because I have been an activist my whole life, preaching, let's leave the CFA, let's put an end to the system, let's put an end to the existing economic model. But the alternatives we had to that were very slim. The only way out for us was that let us fight until we grasp power, then we can leave. But people have been fighting like this for 50 years, and they haven't seen the change. But when I understood how Bitcoin works, I was like, we no longer have to wait till we get into power to make the change. We can start making the change now by adopting Bitcoin on 3 levels. Adopting it as a form of resistance to even begin with. You know, I put myself in a position where I was like, even if I lose out of adopting Bitcoin, I will still adopt Bitcoin just out of stubbornness and resistance. You know, I have a very funny story. My grandfather and the people from his community stopped farming at some point during the colonial era because they were forced to pay taxes. So they all converted from being farmers to hunters, because the taxes were on crops, not on animals. So they were only eating meat. and exchanging some meat for some cereals. But they said they will never contribute a dime to the Colonial Institute. And my grandfather went to jail for the first time because he refused to pay taxes. For them, it was an act of resistance. So even if it was punishing them to some extent to not have cereals like everybody else, they would rather eat meat all year than pay taxes. So for me, at first, Bitcoin was like, you know what, I'll rather use Bitcoin whenever I can than use the CFA. I'd rather send somebody Bitcoin in Togo than send them CFA. Now, if they take it and choose to use CFA, that's on them. But me, morally, I'm not contributing to the continuity of that establishment. That was the first thing. The second thing that I realized, this money gives us the first type of financial and monetary equality we have been fighting for. Why? Because as much as the CFA is bad, many other currencies in Africa are also just as bad. We have 46 currencies in Africa. Simply because the world has decided to trade in certain currencies and protect themselves with policies. So somebody earning in British pounds, in US dollars, in euros, or in Swiss francs will always have monetary advantages over somebody who earns in Naira, or somebody who earns in CFA, or in cedis, or Kenyan shillings. Why? Because our money are worth nothing outside of our borders. We have to buy people's money, pay extra the value before we can get the same access. So you want to order a book in the United States from France, you will only pay the convertibility rate from Euro to USD. I want to buy the same book in the United States from Togo. I first have to pay a fee to convert my money to Euro, then pay another fee to convert the Euro to dollars before I buy the book. This applies to every single thing that is imported to our countries. And our economies are built on 60% of imports. So literally 60% of everything we consume, we pay taxes on it simply because we are Africans.
Wow.
So I'm like, I want to be able to buy a book in Bitcoin in the US and have the same value for it as somebody who paid the same Bitcoin in America or in Japan or in China. So for the first time, you have one money that makes all of us equal. Like if I earn my salary in Bitcoin, the person earning his salary in Bitcoin in China has the same access as I do. The person earning the same in the US has the same value to his money as I do. I don't have to pay an extra fee because I'm Togolese, I'm Nigerian, I'm Kenyan, I'm Malawian, or anything else. That alone makes me happy. So the second point that I'm talking about is that Bitcoin is access to monetary equality. Now the third point is the permissionless access. In autocratic regimes like that of Togo, countless of activists have had their bank accounts shut. Countless of non-profit organizations and civil movements had their bank accounts shut. And people got arrested because they donated money to a movement. It happened in the case of Togo. We still have people in prison today simply because they paid $50 to help people in the movement. They have been in prison for the past 6 years with no trial. None of them is Aziz Goma. I'm saying his name because his case even went to the UN. So in a country where the government controls how you use your money, can arrest you for donating your own money, Bitcoin gives us an alternative to not seek permission before we make money, save money, spend our money, or do whatever we want with our money. So those three function: a tool of resistance, access to financial equality, and permissionless are the key things that make me believe ideologically and philosophically in the power of Bitcoin. And it makes me feel confident because today Bitcoin has made my life easy in many ways. I remember that when I used to travel, I will have to convert to buy dollars or buy euros and making sure I have some cash on me before I go. Now, there's so many products that I built there. I just have my cards that are linked to my wallet. I convert however rate I need to, and I'm good to go. I'm no longer worried here that any government can confiscate my money. Honestly, I don't care. at some point, I used to be afraid of even working because I'm like, okay, I'm saving. What if they steal it?
Yeah, it's like literally you have PTSD
Yes.
of owning money.
Of course. What if they steal it? So even saving was scary. But today it is not anymore. So the ability to be able to access and build wealth is something that I don't take for granted. And I want everyone in my part of the world to understand it. Of course, there's still a lot of information that is missing. So some people get carried away. Others fall trap to crypto people scamming them, telling them, or even scammers legitimately scamming them through Bitcoin by saying, we'll teach you how to buy Bitcoin, and then they steal their money. It happens. But I tell people, hey, if somebody comes to you and say invest $10,000 and the person scams your $10,000, it is not the dollars that is a scam. It's the person who scammed your dollars that is the scammer. Same thing with Bitcoin. If somebody comes to you and say, I'm going to show you how to buy Bitcoin, I'm going to invest in Bitcoin for you, and the person stole your money, it is not Bitcoin that is a scam. It is the person who scammed you by basing the scam on your ignorance of what Bitcoin is. So that's why I push for education. And I tell people to not be lazy about understanding Bitcoin, because once they do, it's unimaginable the number of things they can achieve with it, with this technology, with this knowledge, with this access. The most important thing is access. Having access to a global financial system. We're not being asked, provide an ID. Prove that you are a citizen of the EU, or you are a citizen of the United States, or have a green card of Canada. Being able to have access to services at the same rate as people from certain nations, it is something that has never happened before, and Bitcoin makes it possible. So the thing is that the terrain is still very new, and we still have a huge infrastructural deficit. I mean, a country where more than 70% of people don't have access to electricity 24/7.
70%.
70% is huge. But in reality, despite that, there is a gradual adoption and a fast adoption. In 2021, Togo made it to the top 10 countries with the highest Bitcoin adoption rate in the world. It was number 9 on the list. Togo and Nigeria was featured in the top 10 countries. And I didn't even know there were many Togolese people into Bitcoin. I was surprised when I saw the data, and I was like, but it doesn't surprise me. But the thing is, that's the thing. Bitcoin being a technology, it is something on which you can build a lot of products. And there are amazing companies out there in Africa that are building solutions to make Bitcoin accessible to everyone. You have the likes of the Mashankura that are allowing you to buy Bitcoin with USSD. The same way people buy Scratch Card. You have the likes of Bitnap that allow people to have Visa cards connected to their Bitcoin wallet. So there are amazing projects that are coming on the continent. And I'm certain that in the next 5 years, it's going to be even far more accessible to people day to day than it is today. So the adoption is gradual, it's going, but today Africa has the fastest Bitcoin adoption rate in the world. You know, it's funny when I go to places and people are like, yeah, Bitcoin is interesting, but why are you talking about Africa and Bitcoin? People don't have access to internet or electricity. It is not because some don't have access than others don't. Those who do, the number of people who have access and are using Bitcoin in Africa today outweigh the number of people who have access and are adopting Bitcoin in Europe today. So we are even doing better than those who have electricity 24/7 and internet 24/7. And there's a reason for that. The reason is very clear. It's not necessarily because Africans are smarter than the Europeans or they are more into tech than the Europeans. Africans have needs for Bitcoin that Europeans don't necessarily have. So for the average person in Europe or in America, getting into Bitcoin is one of two things. It's either because, you know, they find it really cool. They like the idea of being, to some extent, I would say, libertarian. Government doesn't control my money. They do it for the, you know, for the fun. It's fun to be rebellious. For some others, they see the opportunity. I mean, this I can speculate, and the value grows, and I make money. So it's something that they do because they want to, not because they have to. In Africa, those who do it not because they want to, it's because they have no other alternatives, and this one is working for them. So their adoption is genuine and is natural because it offers a solution to existing problems. Cross-border payments, for example. You want to send money from Togo to Ghana. These countries are neighbors. They are technically the same people, same languages, same ethnicities, same religions, everything. The money first goes to an intermediary bank in London. Then that bank will send it to an intermediary bank in France before coming back. It can take you 2 to 3 weeks to send money from one bank in Ghana to a bank in Togo.
Wow.
But there's even a limit to how much you can send. So we live in a society where cash was almost the main resource for every trade. But then traveling with cash became dangerous. But today, people are even using Bitcoin without knowing they are using Bitcoin. For them, they're using a service. I want to send money to Nigeria. I'm buying goods for $200,000 in Nigeria. I need to pay someone. There is a startup out there that says, I can send $200,000 to Nigeria for you in 5 minutes for 2%. And they pay, and they just use Bitcoin without knowing they use Bitcoin. That's how adoption is happening on the continent. It's solving people's problem. And it's going to continue doing that. I say something about Bitcoin. Here it is. It is a tool. It is a technology. It is a philosophy. You choose what you want to make out of it. But if you want to wait till you understand all of it before you start using it, you may miss out. I mean, people use cell phones today. Not everybody who uses a cell phone knows how a cell phone is built and knows how you receive a message in a cell phone, what the coding is for you to be able to decrypt the message. They have no clue. They just know that I have a cell phone. I want to test, I test. I want to call, I call. They have the utility aspect of it. Then there's those who use it because, hey, they're like, it's a really cool gadget. I can do A, B, C, D. They are into the tech. They're into the innovation. You have those ones as well. And then you are those who are like, I just like the idea of being able to contact anybody wherever I am. So we have to be mindful that Bitcoin is the same thing. Some people use it because it works for them. Some people use it because it's new, it's challenging intellectually, and they like the idea of learning and building out of it. And there are those who use it because philosophically it aligns with their personal values. I don't want the government to know anything about what I'm doing. That's why I'm using it. So everybody makes what they want out of it.
And even with the volatility of what we saw in Bitcoin, obviously, because as every new technology, there is volatility. But even with that volatility, there's still a use for it.
Right. I mean, the volatility has two consequences. Has two sides of it. The thing is that people who are into trading are more susceptible to losses when it comes to volatility. But not everybody who is doing Bitcoin is into trading. That's one thing.
So sorry, just to clarify, when you use Bitcoin, is it only like in the moment you need to transfer money, so you would basically exchange the CFA into Bitcoin into the currency you want to send it to?
Yeah.
And then that's it. You will not store.
Not everybody is storing.
Okay, yeah, that's
the vast majority of users in Africa are not
just
storing.
As a network, basically, as a sending network.
It is a form of remittance.
Yeah.
There are some who are storing, but not enough. First of all, this is a continent where more than 60% of the people live under $2 a day.
They can't afford just parking money as well.
Not only that they can't afford, but some don't even want to have anything to do with money. Their assets is land, their assets is animals. They trust it more than money, and you won't blame them. These are people whose money has been stolen from them over and over with depreciation, so they would rather put it into tangible things. So the few people who understand Bitcoin are building their wealth gradually and are solving, but we don't have any data. That's the thing. There's a huge lack of data about how many people are storing in Africa. But the data we have is how many people are using it as a form of payment. You see, that's the difference. But we are getting there because the more people understand how Bitcoin functions and how it grows, the more they will start trusting it enough to also invest in it for the long term. But for right now, it will be hard to tell somebody, go and sell your land to buy Bitcoin. They'll tell you, what the hell is that? But we have to give them time to get there. And it's going to happen. It's inevitable.
How can people help you in your cause to make Togo a free country?
Read about us, read about our struggle, talk about it, challenge your legislators, because the Togolese government is funded and supported by the US government, by the EU government, and Togo is one of the largest weapon purchasers of France in Africa.
Yeah, we're talking about it. And also Israel as well. And
Israel
it's
as well.
used as a passerelle.
So the Togolese government is what I would call a mercenary regime. They buy and sell weapons. That's their main business. They have been cited in a lot of reports about that. They buy a lot of weapons and they sell. They sell to rebel groups all over the world. So they are contributing to war everywhere. The Togolese government was selling weapons to the Boers regime during apartheid despite the embargo. They were selling weapons to the Savimbi rebellion, the Savimbi-led rebellion in Angola despite the embargo. They were selling weapons to Charles Taylor in Liberia and Sierra Leone despite the embargo. Togo has been cited over again about violating embargoes all over the world because they are used as a trampoline. They don't do it alone. Some of those world powers, including France, and I'm going to say it, they know there's an embargo and they themselves cannot go and sell because they don't want to contradict themselves on the global scene. So they will pretend that they are selling it to Togo, then Togo takes and then Togo sells to whoever is the quote-unquote enemy that they cannot sell to. I read a report some years ago indicating Togo is one of the people providing weapons to North Korea. And I was like, what the hell? How can Togo provide weapons to North Korea? Like, look at the population of Togo, the size of Togo, the GDP of Togo. We're such a small nation. But Togo does. I was shocked that Togo does. Why? Because Togo is just a pass-through. So those weapons will be seen as being ordered by Togo, being tagged under Togo, but then Togo has a final buyer.
It's really enraging, and it really feels enraging because not only is that country being exploited, but it's being also just used to basically do all kinds of obnoxious
things. It's a mafia
things.
regime.
Yeah.
Everything from money laundering to illicit financial flight to illicit sale of weapons, they are into everything. And that is dangerous when you have thugs running a country. And in the short term, the France government benefited from it. But then in the long term, it's going to harm them, and it already is. Because they have allies that are the most unloyal, immoral people they could be. And when the time came for them to rely on those allies, they are nowhere to be found because they were only in there for the money. And they don't give a damn about anything. It's about time we get to a point where politics and policies are based on values and not profits. And as we start seeing nations as items that we can do transactions with and realize that nations are made of people and whatever decisions we make affects the lives of those people and their future generations. So we need to rehumanize politics. We need to rehumanize international relations. And that is the only way for us to put an end to this ongoing and endlessly escalating states of violence and war and conflict. That is possible. If nations can just understand that no citizens, no people in the world today are willing to continue being exploited and do nothing about it. People are resisting, people are fighting. And when they fight back, it gets ugly. So today, I am not even in a position where I ask for help anymore. I understand that sympathy is something that is genuine to humans, and when you hear stories about nations that are that are saddening, you want to do something about it. But let us put the help thing aside. We don't need help, we need allies. Because it's not about giving support to the people of Togo. It's about building a world that is free from injustice, that will guarantee that our own descendants and our own children will not be subjected to the same oppression someday when those people want to seek revenge. It's about building a better world. And we all have that responsibility as citizens that are obliged to share a planet and that are obliged to share the limited resources of this planet. Yeah.
Thanks. I think this was a beautiful ending message.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you
Farida,
for having me.
And your inspiring story. And I hope we can build many, many more allies, just like you said.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe. Leave your actions down below in the comment section. And if you want to watch more videos, feel free to check the most recent video, but also any other video that we've had published on the channel before. See you next time.